Welcome to Your Yes-Filled Life. I'm Brenda Winkle, an intuitive leadership coach and somatic guide for high achievers, high performers, and spiritual seekers who want more freedom, ease, joy, and energy. You are a visionary leader, driven, intuitive, and ready for more. More flow in your work, more presence and joy in your life, more trust in yourself, your intuition, and the decisions that you make every day. Here, we explore the intersection of intuition, spiritual growth, leadership, and energetics to create energetic sovereignty, blending practical strategy with energetic alignment so you can create success that feels deeply fulfilling at work, at home, in your relationships, and in your personal well-being. You'll hear inspiring stories, practical strategies, and high-level conversations designed to help you expand your leadership, deepen your spiritual growth, and integrate the woo and spirituality into your daily life. Because when your energy is aligned, everything flows. Ready to elevate how you lead and live? Start by downloading my free energy audit at brendawinkle.com/audit and discover what's fueling you or depleting you. Let's do this. Your yes-filled life starts now. Hi, Michele.
Hi, I'm so happy to see you.
I'm so happy to see you. Where are you? Are you in LA or New
I'm
York?
in LA, yeah, but it's as cold here as New York, so you'd think I was in New York. With all this global warming, the weather's like crazy.
It is. Before we just dive in, because I know we're going to dive, I have a question for you. What is one thing you either did or did not do that has led to your yes-filled life?
So I would say it was starting my writing career because I am someone who is so regimented and safe and comfortable. And so this was 25 plus years ago, but had been in a job that I hated. I got fired and I decided to go freelance. And that was working from home wasn't a thing back then. None of my friends were doing it. And I'm someone who's very safe. And so the normal thing would have been to get another job. And yet I decided to take this chance. And even though the early years might not have been yes-filled life, it really has led me to that because I was able to be around when my kids were home and now I just feel like I have so much freedom in terms of where I can be to work, but also the other part of that is like in the last few years, the thing I've done is really be able to trust my gut when I'm taking on projects and and like you always know when you're about to take one that's not right. And sometimes you still take it. So it's learning to trust my gut and not take those and know that something else is going to come along and I'll be fine, you know.
I love everything that you just said. Everything, like from embracing the unknown, which was kind of out of character for you at the
So
time.
out of character.
And then also listening to that inner nudge when something's not aligned. And I want to hear more about both. You're successful, you're capable, you've built something powerful, but it still feels like you're carrying too much. What if I told you you don't have to lead that way anymore? The Intuitive Way is my private 6-month coaching experience for ambitious and intuitive women who are ready to lead with more confidence, more clarity, and way less hustle. Inside this private coaching container, we'll blend somatic coaching with intuitive guidance. And yes, I'll also bring my own psychic gifts. You'll get private support, personalized rituals, and energetic insights to help you make aligned decisions, trust your body, understand your intuition, and lead from your soul, not your stress. Because leadership doesn't have to feel heavy, it gets to feel like you. Go to brendawinkle.com/intuitive way or click the link in the show notes. You're going to walk away with more self-trust, clearer decisions, and a way of leading that actually feels good in your body. This is for the woman who's ready to stop second guessing and start trusting her own rhythm, her own energy, and her own inner knowing. Go to brendawinkle.com/intuitive way for more information. So, first of all, Michelle and I have known each other for a while. We met in Florida, literally on the beach as
Yes.
Michelle was coming out of the Atlantic Ocean. And I just locked eyes with her and started to walk toward her with no reason other than I just felt like drawn. We had never seen each other before. And
No. And we were just chatting and and I'm sort of shy and not a small talk person. So it was like, it was so out of character for me too. And then it wound up being such a nice friendship.
yeah, yeah. And ironically, we were going to the same place, but we didn't know it. And
Right.
so we got to spend some time together there. And then over the years, we spent a few days together.
Yes.
And it's just been wonderful and really, like you say, a really nice friendship. Very grateful.
Yes. And it's so nice to see how you've grown and your business has grown since I met you. It's unbelievable.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
It's
And,
amazing.
you've been a part of it because you have helped me really learn to articulate different things and put myself out there in a different way.
Yeah, and this is all going to be in that book you're writing. Just you
That's
don't
right.
realize it yet.
Yep, you're right. You're right. So I remember you talking about when, and by the way, I've taken a writing class from Michelle and it was incredible. So
So much
value
fun.
packed. Yes, it was really fun. And I remember you talking about getting something published, your very first piece published in the New York Times.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if you can tell that story because that story has inspired me still.
Well, so that story is a perfect example. So I took this job that I didn't like within 3 months. I knew it was not for me. I was an account executive in an ad agency and it just wasn't for me and it was not creative but it was a job and I was 22 and needed a job. And so to make myself feel better, I started taking writing classes at the New School in NYU, and I loved it. So it was sort of my outlet. And so then in one of those classes, the teacher invited me to her private class, which was in her living room. It was like 7 to 10 people who were amazing writers. And every week you had to show up with 2 pages written. Like you could not walk in the door without those 2 pages. And so it was a stressful from like Thursday till that day. It was so stressful every week. What can I come up with? And plus, you had to read that piece and get comments on it. And
Mm.
so it was super intimidating and so personal. And like now I feel like, why was it so stressful? But it was. And I didn't know any of the other people. I mean, over time, I was in the class for years. We did know each other, and so I would just write, about whatever. And so I had this experience where I had 2 golden retrievers living in an apartment in New York City, and there was a dog run at NYU a few blocks away, and my now ex-husband and I were wanted to join. And so I thought, oh, you just go up, walk in, and it wasn't like that. It turned out it was like applying to college. And so we had an application, we had an interview. It took 6 months from the application in to hear that we got an interview. Then we had all this. So I wrote just for that class, just because I needed 2 pages. I wrote something that I was sort of even embarrassed to read because people were writing deep. Most of the stuff is deep and thoughtful. But I showed up, I wrote it. Everyone was laughing. They thought it was really funny, and that was it. And then a couple months later, there was a big controversy in New York City about dog runs or dogs in Central Park. And the commissioner at the time had said something about how there should be more dog runs. So I was like, wait a minute, I can connect this to my story. So I changed the lead. I added that, current event, wrote my story, walked it over to the New York Times. Like back then, that's how you hand it. So I dropped it off with a note for the editor and didn't think I'd hear. It was a Thursday, and he called me on Friday, and he said, if you're willing to work with me all weekend on edits, this will run Sunday. And I nearly fell over. And it did run Sunday, and it was huge. It was like a half a page with an illustration.
Wow.
And up until then, even though I was in this job that I hated, what I would do is I'd do my job till 5 or 6, and then I would stay after and write. And back then, the world of magazines, every magazine had a personal essay. So I thought that would be my way in. And so I kept sending these personal essays out and kept getting rejected and rejected. And again, I didn't know it was a career, but I just thought, oh, it would be nice to be published. And once that was published, the next day that week, I had like five, and back then the editor-in-chief reached out to. I had five different editor-in-chiefs reach out to me and say, "Oh, you know that story you sent us about this? Now we want it," or that, or hired me. And so I was still working at the time, and in the bio, I said that I was a freelance writer. My boss came into my office and he's like, "You're not a freelance writer. You work here. You obviously don't like it here." And then within a month, I got fired. And I was in touch with him years after, and we joked about how he started my career, but it was devastating to be
Mhm.
fired. But that did give me the strength to some degree to, okay, I'm going to try and freelance. So, and it worked out. It was really meant to be. So that pressure. So I teach a class now different from the one you took that's writing from personal experience also, where you have to come with your pages and you have to, and I know how stressful it is, but there's also, it's so great when you read something because most of the time the feedback is positive. So I've modeled it after that because so many of the things I wrote in that class have been published. So many of them turned into personal essays. And so it just was so worth it to have that stress pressure each week,
I
which
love
again is
that.
that, yeah, and that's out of my being out of my comfort zone was that class, and yet it worked out.
It did.
It
It
did.
has worked out very well. So you're pointing to something here. You're pointing to a few things. One is you're pointing to being rejection tolerant by submitting things to a lot of places. So you're not waiting for one thing to come
Right.
back. That's really important. And then the other piece that you're pointing to is you wrote all the time, whether or not
Right.
you were working on something. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, the writing all the time is the key, right? Like Anne Lamott, who's a favorite writer of mine, said the hardest part is getting your, ass in the chair and writing each day. And it really is. And so, and you can make so many excuses. And so that is when I'm working with my writing class or even celebrities that I write books for, I give them writing assignments. I give them writing prompts and I tell them to set their timer for 7 minutes and answer my writing prompt. And that I feel like, again, we get so much content for the books from that. But it's being consistent. It's sitting down and doing those 7 minutes. So I don't do it every day, but I try to do it as much as possible. And back then, now I'm busier with writing other people's books, but back then, every single day, I made myself write. And it was stressful because sometimes and I would never look at it, but as I'm writing, I was thinking, this is so stupid. And then you come back, and my rule is like to not look at it for a few days. And most of the time when you come back and look at it, you're like, wow, this is great. Did I write this? Or you don't even remember it. So the consistency, obviously, with anything in life is so important, but with writing, it's just to keep writing and writing and writing and just noticing, because once you start writing, you start noticing things. Like one of the exercises in the class that I do is like just think of something and imagine it. And Anne Lamott says this as like a 1 inch picture frame, like just like, so pick a scene, with your grandmother at the farmer's market and write one little piece of that. And so once you start doing that, you start noticing details wherever you are. And so that's really important. And then the rejection was tough. I mean,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
wasn't so tolerant, but I guess I just had to be. And I still have the fat printed out spreadsheet where I would have the name of the article, who I sent it to. And back then you sent like a postcard with it, self-addressed, that said, "We have received your thing." And I, kept getting those things rejected, but I knew a lot of them were really well written. And so eventually most of my pieces that I sent out found a home, or a variation of it was done. And it also got me my first column, which was in Shape magazine, had a teen magazine, and I got a monthly column in there. And from then on, I always had columns. And so it was just like the rejection is important. And anything that you want to do that's worthwhile, you're going to get rejected, but it's really hard at first.
Hmm. Yes, it is hard. It is hard. And I love how you highlight almost everything that you wrote eventually got published. I had something that I sent out in November, which I mean, it's January as we're recording at the end of January. It's not that long ago, but it feels like a long time ago.
Right.
And I just had the editor reach back out and say, "Hey, we want this. Can you do X, Y, and Z for it for a magazine?" And it
That's
it
great.
it was felt really good. And I'm putting out enough stuff that I'm not waiting around to
Right.
hear from people because I'm just throwing submissions out every which way. And sometimes they hit, and sometimes it takes just a little bit of time.
And sometimes they reach back out and it's already been published somewhere. And amazingly, they're kind of intrigued by that. Like I had that happen where they'd say, we want this. And I said, oh, it already was published in, Runner's World. And the editor was intrigued by that. It looked like I was so in demand. But yes, I think constantly sending, and I was sending so much out that at times I'd get rejection and I wouldn't even remember what was that thing I wrote. And so sending a lot out is important, but also you can have one story, or one article, but you do have to tailor it for each publication. So you want
Yes.
to be careful that you are like knowing who their audience is or just tweaking it. Um, and that works too, because then they're all different essays, but you definitely want that, but you also want to send a lot out at once. It's
Yes.
really,
And to your point, if I'm working with a specific editor, I will send her something and I'll give her first right of refusal. So I'm not going to
oh,
send that out to another editor just because I know the editors now.
right,
So I am very careful not to sprinkle too far and too wide unless I say in the initial thing, I really want to get this out. I'm sending it to more than one person.
right, right. Yeah. And also being willing to make changes because I know in the writing group that I was in, I was definitely not the best writer. There were incredible writers in that class. But I mean, I haven't kept up with them, but I know within like the 10 years after the class, I was the only one who was doing this full time. And because no one was willing to have changes. Like I remember one girl had an amazing story and a magazine wanted it, but she wasn't willing to make changes, and I'm like, change every word, but just take
That's
my,
how I feel.
take my idea. Like I just want it out there. So you have to be willing to make changes and accept. That's why I like, I write books for people and I prefer traditional publishing to self-publishing because I love the village. Even though you can get that with self-publishing, I love knowing there's sort of scaffolding and someone else who's going to read it and get their opinion and, tell me, make a change or tell me it's not clear. And so you have to be open to not only rejection, but comments and feedback
I
and
love
take it
that.
in. Yeah.
Can you talk about what it's like helping people write books? Because you're a ghostwriter. What's that world like?
It's really fun. I mean, my through line in terms of which projects I pick are they have to help someone. The book has to help someone. So whether it's a book on, I wrote a book for one of the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills who almost died of Lyme disease. She had a terrible 4-year journey. So that helped a lot of people. Or even books on curly hair. That helps people because it's so much more than hair. It's self-esteem.
Hmm.
Or we did a curly kids book. Or so that's my through line. And it's really fun because a lot of people have a story to tell, but they don't realize that they don't need to write it, that they can have someone else do it. And so it's really fun because they have this story, and in the beginning, they're really nervous and they think this is a huge undertaking. They always ask me, like, what's the time commitment? And I just tell them, you just talk and I'm organizing everything. And then I also get them to write with the exercises, but it's really fun. I mean, sometimes I haven't really had a frustrating project because again, this is their book and I'm just the vessel to get it out. So there's really never been something that the person wanted in or out or changed that I didn't agree with. So, but it's fun. It's fun to help people write their books, get their story or their idea out. And also, it's really healing. A lot of people that I worked with are on some sort of journey or have had some sort of experience. And um, like I had one book for a celebrity and she was going through a terrible divorce and in the beginning that was all she talked about and by the time the book was done she's like I feel healed. I don't need to mention this. So writing is really, really healing and it's healing in the moment. Like if you do your 7 minutes, if you feel anxious or upset, if you do your 7 minutes and like you can do a writing prompt or you can just sometimes I say write a letter to someone. It just gives your writing focus. It doesn't even have to have anything to do with the issue. but so you write in those 7 minutes, you feel so much better. You feel healed, you feel calm. Like it's like meditating where you get a benefit in the moment after the meditation, but then over time it heals. And so that's the experience I've had with ghostwriting I write for celebrities and business leaders and experts, and all of them feel like they've come to some realization by the end of the book. And and they're always amazed at how much easier it was than they thought.
I love this. And you've written for some really high profile, like A-list type
Yeah.
names. And I know that you can't talk about all of them, but I know that you talk about a few of them. What was like of the people that you can talk about? What were some of your experiences like?
Well, the one I wrote for the woman who had Lyme disease was an amazing experience because she had a disease that people is like they call an invisible disease. And so you can't see it and you look fine. And she was, a beautiful formal model. So, and just that was a really great experience because she felt so not seen and heard. And then she got her book out and it was called Believe Me because no one believed her that she had this thing. And so it's really fun. I mean, I'm very picky now. I've had one or two bad experiences with people who were not authentic or just didn't appreciate what I did, but that is like one or two out of, I don't even know. I have to count like, because I also write book proposals. So I'll
Hmm.
help people sell their book too. So there's been a few people, if I've done their book proposal and it's sold, but I'm on another project or I can't do the book. So it's been a lot. I have to count, but it's just great to help people and it's fun to be in their world. And I think I'm sort of I'm very discreet and I'm
Hmm.
not, I'm just sort of a wall and I don't, nothing surprises me. I sign an NDA, so and I just kind of am very open and accepting. And I think my strength is making people feel comfortable telling these really difficult stories sometimes.
I would agree. You're just so easy to talk to because you're so genuine and safe,
Oh,
and
thank you.
you keep a confidence like no one I've ever met. So,
Yeah, I'm the wall, so it's good. It's really good. I know even after the fact, like I always offer to sign an NDA, but it's like I'm going to keep it secret anyway. And especially if they're writing a book and there's some good juicy items in there, you don't want to spill it before. But
mhm.
I am very, concerned. I shred all my papers. Like I just want to make sure they feel very safe because a lot of times you have to hear the whole story and like I call it like the X-rated version, and then you
Mhm.
can pare it down. So they have to be open to telling me everything so I can find a way if there's parts they don't want to share to, um, share it in that way. But I need to know the whole story to get to that piece. Otherwise, it doesn't, it's like it can sound like something's missing. So,
Right.
it's just creating trust. And it's interesting because in the beginning, people are, especially celebrities, are very wary and they're very distrusting. And by the end, it's like, it's just they tell me everything. Sometimes too much. It's like being a therapist.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. It's
You know,
and also the publication process is stressful because then now this story that's been between the two of us is out in the world and that's very a stressful part. Or a lot of times people who are like more introverted and now they're going to be out there on a press tour or so being there like the shrink sort of during that process is not really part of my job, but it is part of my job.
mm, I can only imagine because I know even with the book that I have self-published, there's a part of me that feels extraordinarily vulnerable knowing that it's out there. And I remember somebody approaching me, I think on a dating app, who had bought the book and connected with me on a dating app and referenced a story that I told in the book. But at the time, he didn't say that he had bought the book. And so
Oh,
it was really jarring to me. And I was like, wait, how do you know that? I know that we haven't had this conversation.
that's so
And he's
crazy.
like, it was in your book. I bought your book when I found your name out.
Is that stalkerish or is that sweet? I can't.
Well, I don't know, honestly. Um, we didn't stay together very long.
Right,
I'll just say that.
right. So, yeah, I mean, you're putting a personal story out there. And so, I mean, when I work with experts. I've done health books. That's not the same. But even in that, like every book I work on, whether it's a doctor, a business leader, or a celebrity, even if it's a prescriptive self-help book,
Mhm.
there's always a memoir story aspect because that's you connect with people on their stories. And that's really important. And so even doctors I've worked with tell their personal stories about, which is just much more interesting. Even if you're coming to the book for the medical part, it's so comforting to know that the author, the doctor, has had the same experience as you.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah, I love that. And I heard a quote, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it was something like 80% of the population says that they have a book inside them.
I know it is, I think that is the number. It's amazing. I mean, if I had a dollar for every time someone told me they had a great idea, I'd be not be doing this. So not everyone has a great idea. But everyone has a book in them. And even if you just write it, I worked with a guy, a very successful entrepreneur who wasn't sure he wanted to do a book for the world, but we created this great book proposal, which was even more than a proposal because it had a lot more like when you do a proposal, each chapter just gets a page. We expanded it, but it wound up being a great thing for his family. Like they loved it because they didn't know any of those stories. His kids and grandkids didn't know all those business stories. So
Mm,
it's like getting
mhm,
it on paper is just a good idea. And you can always start with just doing it for you and not planning to tell anybody. And that happens too when I have people who are not, maybe from my writing classes or I do these VIP days with people. And I always say, just start as if this is just for you. And 9 times out of 10, they're so excited about it that they either make it a self-published book or they write something or they do share it. So I think initially when you're writing, don't share with anyone because you don't need anybody's feedback. And
mhm.
then they're on your shoulder and then you have these questions. So I would say like if you're going to write thinking this is just for you. Nobody's going to see this. And then you can go from there.
I love that advice. That applies to a lot of things in life. Like keep
Yes.
it to yourself until it's fully formed. Ideas, projects, courses.
Yes.
Yes. There's something really magical about keeping it and letting it marinate and get really, really potent before speaking it into the world. Because if there's anybody there who doesn't fully understand, they can really ick on your wow.
Yes, totally. I've never heard that expression, but yes, totally. And that was when you asked the question of the yes-filled life. That was I was debating between the writing career or the other is to stop worrying about what other people think, which as a former people pleaser, that is, used to be really difficult. But now I sort of stopped thinking that way because I'm trusting that how I feel. But if you keep it to yourself, if you share, sometimes you don't know what their reaction is going to affect you, and so you don't want someone else's opinion to affect something like that.
Hmm.
Unless it's going to be the thing that motivates you, like you need to make a commitment to write your 7 minutes every day. So then you tell someone, but even with that, you can tell a friend, like, just check in with me and make sure I'm doing it, but you don't have to share what you're doing, what you're
Yeah.
writing. Yeah.
Yeah. Until it's like fully cooked.
Exactly, exactly. And then it's exciting because then it's also great when no one knows you're doing something and then all of a sudden you have, a manuscript or a chapter or an article published. So I just feel like it's like keep your head down. That has always been my thing is don't talk about it as much as just do it because once you do it, it speaks for itself. But there's a lot of people who talk about what they're going to do and
Hmm.
talk about it and talk about it, and then they don't actually do it. Or when they do, it's not as good as what they've been talking about. So I think you just keep your head down and go.
Agreed. And sometimes our subconscious is listening as we talk about doing the thing, and we can actually trick ourselves into thinking we've done the thing. But all we're
Right.
doing is talking about it.
Yes, it's talking about and also that's one thing with writing. Like a lot of people wait to find the perfect journal or they can't decide should they do the computer or handwritten or whatever. And the one thing I'm very like sensory sensitive, so I do need a journal with smooth paper and I have a specific pen I like. It's just like from Amazon, but you can't. But a lot of people let that hold them back. They're like, I don't have the perfect journal. I don't have, and so you can't if you're not gonna. You got to just write. And I do think
Hmm.
it's better for the 7 minutes to do it by hand. I feel like there's a brain hand connection that's
Hmm.
just gets things flowing. It helps with the calming and the healing and reducing anxiety. And but if you can't, again, do it on your computer. If you're paranoid that people are going to read it, do it on your computer and just, lock it up or something. I want someone I'm working with said she kept a journal and she hid it in her apartment so far that when she moved, she forgot to take it. And the next person called her and said, "We just found your journal." And she was mortified.
Oh, oh my gosh. When you were talking about the pen, I'm also very sensory sensitive. And if my pen doesn't work, like one of those cheap little
Yes.
stupid ones with the caps that people chew,
Oh, I hate those.
I hate those. I won't write. So I get good pens. And they don't have to be expensive. I mean, they
No,
can't, they can be, but they just need to be a good pen.
it needs to be like my favorite is the Energel Pentel, and I always get purple. And then there's this from $7 like journal notebook from Amazon that just has smooth paper. So I feel like as long as it can it's like reading a book. I like reading a book when the paper is smooth and the font is nice and not that kind of like library, high school like paper that in those little books we used to read. So I feel like that does matter, but you can't let it hold you back. Just like you can't let anybody's opinions hold you back when you want to write something. And if you want to get started, the best way is just start writing letters to people, dead or alive, about one thing you're going through. And then, or find writing prompts. Like writing prompts are great, and that's what I give the people I work with. Is I give them writing prompts to just get it going. And sometimes, or we did that in the class you were in,
Hmm.
just, and you don't have to do all of them, but just if you do it a few days, it really helps. And it can be part of like a nice morning ritual or like before bed ritual. And then the other thing about handwriting is now there's like on the notes app on your phone, or there's other apps where you can scan the handwriting and it turns into text. So that's a
Hmm.
big thing because that used to always be my dilemma was I don't feel like retyping this and I have such messy handwriting. So that app is really great so that you don't lose if you are writing a book or you are writing a blog or something, but the handwriting is the way to get it out. You can then use one of those apps and make it into then it's on your computer and then you can use it as content.
I love that. So you just answered a question that I had, which is how would you advise somebody to get started writing their book? And you just answered that.
Yeah, I
And
would just get like start writing a letter or ask yourself a question and just answer that question in those 7 minutes. Like, why do I want to write this book? Or, or even it doesn't have to be a question. It could be this idea is important because, and then you just write and you write for the 7 minutes. And 9 times out of 10, you go over the 7 minutes and you're having so much fun. But if you're not, like I picked seven just because five is a little too short, 10 can be intimidating, but most people say they keep going. So I would say to get started is start with a letter to someone about what you're doing. And you can have that every single day for, 5 days, the same idea. Why am I writing this book? And you'll get to it. And usually it's on the fourth page, the answer. So I would do that and I would just start setting up a regular writing time, like put it in your calendar and do the 7 minutes. And then I would have one day a week or every 2 weeks where you take what you've written and you read it. And like I said, I would never read it that day, the next day, but you like leave some time for it kind of marinates on its own. And then you put that in your calendar like a day, just go to a coffee shop and read what you've written and highlight. And it's that part's really empowering because in those moments you realize that you have something there. And
mm,
then to just always write with no editor on your shoulder. No one's looking. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about being neat. Just write and I tell that to the people I work with, and sometimes they're like, wait, but I'm typing on our document. I'm going to ruin it. And it's like, well, my job is to clean it up. If you're worrying about spelling and editing and grammar, you're not going to get it out. You need to just get it out.
wow. I love that. I love that. Just like it's important to release the perfectionism because that's how the
Yes.
story comes through.
Yes, and it takes a village to write a book. So even if you are going to self-publish, traditional publish, there are other cooks in that kitchen with you. So like there's going to be an editor, there's going to be a copy editor, there's going to be an agent, there's going to be someone. So you don't have to, which is great because you get your thoughts down and then someone looks at it from a totally different perspective. And it's great. You get such, you have to take a breath and take in the feedback and realize it's coming from a good place because obviously they are going to make comments and changes. But you don't need that perfectionist. Like I was so perfectionist in the beginning, even articles I wrote, and then I realized there are other people, there's scaffolding to make sure that this is, perfect or as good
Mm-hmm.
as it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that you taught me is that the editor matters. Like it
Yeah,
can't just be some random editor that some person that says I'm an editor. It's somebody who needs to understand your journey, the type
right,
of writing that you're doing, because my book is going to be a little bit about my story, like it's a little bit memoir, but then it's also a service book with
right.
with things that people can try. And one of the people that who is a very experienced editor edited a draft of the book
Oh,
and
wow.
did not this was before we had met. It did not edit the wait a minute. Let me say this again. She edited my copy that I had given her,
Right.
and she took out all of the references to energy work or spirituality
Oh,
because it didn't resonate with her. And she was like, needs to be science based, needs to be science based. And I was like, oh, thank you for bringing this to my attention. And you're not going to be able to edit this book because this is the book.
right. That's so interesting. That's a really good lesson. It's like
Yeah.
and I had that experience once. I worked on someone's book and she was very spiritual energy, and we had an editor who bought the book but was not energy spiritual at all. So a lot of those things got cut out. And yeah, you have to be and it's still your book in the end. I mean, if you publish it, like the editor, they're buying it. If a traditional publisher gives you an advance. So to some degree, they have a say, but hopefully it's your book. And what you described as a book that has self-help plus memoir is, I think, the best kind of book because people connect with you on the story, and that's what makes them go on the journey with you.
Mhm.
And then, but then you're teaching them something. So it's not by being on the journey or sharing a story, you're really opening up instead of talking down to them. You're just sort of walking alongside them. And I think those are the best books.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So this experience was before we had met, and I carried shame about that experience because I was like, oh, she's right. You know,
right.
all because again, it was that, like you talked about the editor on your shoulder. It was that kind
Yeah.
of a feeling where it took the wind out of my sails.
It does. And people, do. I think there was someone in our group who really felt, I think I don't know if it was our group but someone commented on their writing and it really made them feel. I mean, initially when someone gives you feedback, you always feel a little bit defensive or whatever. Sometimes it's right. For you, that definitely wasn't the right advice. And is that the book that you had on Amazon? Was that
Hmm.
book that
Yeah.
okay.
I eventually discarded the edits and
Yeah, and
but
did your
yeah.
own thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was self-published.
It was self-published, but that book needs to be in a major publisher's house.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're working
And
on it.
that happens like, well, I forget there's a few famous books that were originally self-published and then they got picked up and by traditional publishers. So, yeah, if you have a story to tell, I mean, sometimes you think it's not interesting. Sometimes when I'm working with people, they'll turn to me and say, "Is this even does anybody care about this?" But if you care about it and you've told one or two people and they had a reaction, people care about it. Like they do.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
you just have to find your audience and, it's going to find its way.
totally. Totally. So as I think about the work of writing and I talk with people, one of the first questions they have is, should I self-publish? Should I try and get the book published? And what would the steps even be? And I know that this is like a huge question because there's an entire class on
Right.
this, but just for real simplicity, high level, um, for the listener that's like, I want to toe dip into this, could you give them
Right.
a broad overview and then anything that you offer that could be supportive?
So a traditional publisher is what's been done for years and years is a person writes a book proposal They get an agent. The agent submits it to various publishers, and so within the publishing houses, there's many, many editors. And so if you have a good agent, what they do is submit it to the correct editor because one publisher can have various editors, like in your situation, one could be not spiritual, one could love that. So, and then ideally, it's submitted and then the publisher, someone loves it and makes you an offer. Sometimes if it's really good, they'll have an auction or bidding, two people bidding against each other. And then they buy your book, they give you an advance, and then they give you a certain amount of time to write it. Usually it's like a year or more. I've never had that much. I don't know. I always seem to be on projects where it's like it's due in 6 weeks or not 6 weeks, but I've had them where it's, been quicker, which I kind of like. But then, and so you're paid in advance. And so you get half that money up front and then you work on your book and then you can have a ghostwriter, you can have a book doctor, you can just write it yourself because you do have an editor at the publishing company. And if you hand in your draft and they really think you need a writer, they'll let you know. But it depends. Some people also just have day jobs. They're great writers, but they're a doctor or on a TV show and they can't write it. And then that traditional publisher has the distribution. So they have a way where it gets into the stores and, Barnes and Noble, all that. But the thing is today, self-publishing is just such a big thing because it's much easier than it used to be. I have a friend who wrote a book, self-published like 10 years ago, and then he just did one like two. And the difference is unbelievable. Like what a self-published book today can look like, you wouldn't even be able to tell that it's. And so that's if so the other option is self-published. So you write your book, you find a company, and again, it's like there's a menu of items where so you're not being given an advance. Now you're paying for this to come out, but it depends on the situation. Like, I don't know what yours was, but sometimes there's self-publishers who don't charge you anything. And they just, when the book is sold on Amazon or wherever, they take a piece in that moment. So, you're not getting an advance up front, but you're also self-publishing, you get your book out much quicker because from a traditional publisher, from the day they sell it till when it goes out, it's typically like at least 2 years. And if
Mm-hmm.
you really want your story, so that's a benefit. And also, it used to be traditional publishers, the marketing was really important. Like they had the marketing team, but we're in a world of social media where you can just market your own book. So there's pros and cons to each, but the thing about self-publishing is it's getting closer and closer to traditional publishing because they have menus and you pay more for more services. So you can have a top editor, you can have all the things, the village that you get with a traditional publisher. So, it's
That's so
less.
helpful.
I mean, I've mostly done traditional published books and I like it because it's very directed and you do have other voices in there saying, but if you have a story that you just want to tell, why not self-publish it, Or a lot of people try a traditional publisher and if that doesn't sell, then they go self-publish because again, you can do it so quickly. Um, and you have a lot more control over the cover and all that. So I was at a ghostwriters conference last January and met a lot of really interesting people who have self-publishing companies. So I know because there also have been scam self-publishing companies where
Mm-hmm.
people have lost a lot of money and I've heard those stories. So you want a reputable one, but there are not a lot, but there's some really good ones out there. And I met a bunch of those at this conference and I was amazed. I'd never actually, I mean, it was like a I'd never met another ghostwriter before. Like I really hadn't. So it was so much fun to meet other people who do what I do because I sort of fell into this. I was a magazine writer and then I just fell into this book writing, which wound up being great because magazines no longer exist. But I didn't really know any other ghostwriters. So that was a really fun experience to just compare our ways of doing things. I learned a lot about, different ways to bill clients and different ways to do the project. But I learned a lot of people self-publish and that the quality is really good.
That's incredible. So yeah, you answered a question that popped up for me as you were talking about how did you get into ghostwriting? And you said it was through the magazine.
I was doing freelance writing for magazines and had a full career. And then I was doing, I had a column in Cosmo, like a dating column, and there was a dating book by a celebrity, and they wanted a magazine writer. So they reached out to me, and I was like, I've never written a book. I didn't even know how much to, they were like, do you have an agent? No. What do you charge? I had no clue. So I wound up getting a friend's agent to pretend she was my agent. And and she negotiated the deal for me. And then she became my agent for like 10 years. And then I wound up getting from that project, I wound up getting my own work all the time. And I was bringing it to her. And I was like, why am I paying her to do, like, I'm bringing this in. So, and I was exclusive with her. So then I no longer used her, but if she had projects, she brought them to me. But yeah, it was through the magazine and it was totally, I started in magazines as a health and fitness writer. Like that was my area. So that's if you want to get into writing, I just was talking to a bunch of young women who are juniors, seniors in college, and I was saying, like, find one area that you're really good at or really interested in. But then it expanded because I was like a fitness writer, but then I kind of started doing health stories and then I got into beauty writing, but it was like beauty with a health twist. So it wasn't stories on 5 beautiful mascaras, but it was just like the benefits of these ingredients. And then from that, I got into doing relationships. It just like slowly evolved, but it was having one really narrow focus. And so when I was sending out those essays, most of them were fitness related, even though they were personal. They were like about a ballet class I took or how I learned to ride my bike in New York City. They were all in that area. And then I like, excelled at that. And then the magazines would be like, well, why don't you try this? But I do think that's if you're trying to get into that, that's a good way to go. And then with the books, so then I got that one book project and then I got another one and another one. And it went from like that being a small part of my business to magazines folding, and the online ones don't pay as well. And so then I just went completely into the book world. And then the book proposal thing also just, I didn't even know what that was. But when I did my first book, I didn't even know that ghostwriting existed. Like I thought if you were Bill Clinton or, someone, you wrote your own book, you sat and it's not how it is. It's still your ideas. And I remember a few people saying to me, I can't believe you do that. They get all the credit, but it's not, it's their ideas. It's me just helping them organize it and put it on paper. And yes, I write it, but it's, it's not mine and I'm fine with it. Like sometimes my name's on the cover, sometimes it's on the title page, but for me, it's not. Like one of the agents I work with now said, having your name on the cover is for your mother, like so she can brag about you. Besides that, like if someone wants to know who wrote a book, they can figure it out. And also, you're always in the acknowledgments. And so, anyone in the world, like if there's an agent with a celebrity client similar to something you've written, they're going to pick up that book, go to the acknowledgments, see that you wrote it, and you'll get the job. So, I don't need to be like the center. I'm not really comfortable being the center of attention. So I'm fine with the behind the scenes thing. And it is their ideas. Like people think that it's not, but it is. Sometimes people like blame the ghostwriter. I think it was Trump who had something in his book that they brought to a trial and he said, "Oh no, the ghostwriter wrote that. I didn't see that." And that's,
Oh.
I mean, I make sure my co-author sees every single word. And I've never worked with someone who didn't look at I actually worked on one project where the person didn't look at anything and it was super stressful because
Mm-hmm.
she's like, I'm sure it's fine. This was years and years ago. And now I wouldn't let anybody do that. I'm so careful because you don't want anything published that they're not going to be happy with.
Totally. And, to your point about the ghostwriter with Trump, that is par for the course.
Right. Yes, exactly. It's not surprising.
Yeah.
But blame the ghostwriter, you don't want to be that ghostwriter who gets blamed that something made it into the book that, or, that wasn't their idea or and his was something just I don't even remember what it was, but it was, so I don't think
Mm.
he used that ghostwriter again, but
I bet the ghostwriter wouldn't have taken the job even if
yeah,
he wanted to.
yeah, I think he's been interviewed before, about it. But it's fascinating. Like it's just a fun job that I'm so happy I can make into a career and it's flexible and I feel like I work a lot, but I'm lucky that it's just something I love to do. And for me during COVID, a lot of people were kind of turned upside down, and I wasn't. I actually was busier than ever because all these people I was working on their books now had nothing to do. So I
Hmm.
was churning them out. But it's a great flexible, it can be anywhere kind of job. And even and especially with Zoom has been huge because now meeting with clients, it used to be you really needed to meet in person because you had to spend time because it wasn't in the first hour that you heard the good story. Like I remember working with someone, um, and we sat for 3 hours, and it wasn't our first time meeting. And in the third hour was when she told me about her eating disorder and like a whole part that was huge for the book. And I couldn't believe she waited that long, but they just need to get comfortable. So
Hmm.
you have to meet in person. But Zoom has also been really helpful for like those follow-ups or small things or,
That's
just
amazing.
connecting. Yeah.
So if somebody, I know that people are going to reach out to you because they want to follow you, they want to see what you're doing, and maybe they want to take one of the courses that you offer. Where can people find you?
So my Instagram is mbender878 or my website, which is just michelebender.com, Michelle with one L. And yeah, I can, I do when I can promote the books I'm working on. They're on my Instagram, and I do have classes, and I'm about to start the writing from personal experience, which you can take that if you want to write a book, or if you're someone like how I was way back. I just loved writing and needed that creative outlet, and then it turned into something. So you just don't know. But if you're someone who loves to write, and it's the same thing, it's like we read it and you get feedback, and it's so great to get different people's perspectives.
Hmm.
It's so interesting, or you see what resonates. So it's really fun, and again, most of the people you don't know, so it's not like it's strangers reading your stuff. And we do it on Zoom, and it's so much fun, and you learn a lot. Like you learn a lot from just listening to other people's work.
Hmm.
And we talk
Yeah.
about the technique and that kind of thing, but it's really just doing it. Doing it is like sitting down and writing is the only way to write, but people think about it, they do outlines, they get index cards, they spend years finding the perfect journal. It's like, no, just do it. Just sit down in that chair and write.
Yes, agreed. Just sit down in that chair and write.
Yeah, which is the
Yeah.
hardest part.
It is. It is the hardest part to get started. But those prompts that you gave during the class that I took from you, one of those prompts, I don't even remember the prompt that you gave. I don't remember, but I do remember what I wrote about, and it was a memory that has really been present for me over the last year with my dad.
That's
And
so
I was
interesting.
so glad that you had, and the prompt had nothing to do with parents. It was
Right.
something random. I don't know what the prompt was, but
That's so interesting.
yeah. And so, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes. And it's interesting because in one of the classes, I don't know if it was ours or another one, I had people write just in 7 minutes. We just sat quietly. We all wrote, and then only one person was brave enough to read, and hers was unbelievable, so good. And everyone's like, "Oh my God, I'm so intimidated by that. How did she do that in 7 minutes?" But it also inspired them because then a lot of people started reading their work, like the next class and the next class. So it is good to just be around that. It's so
Hmm.
creative and it's fun, and and it also just to hear other people's stories is so impactful.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Michelle, we probably will continue to talk after we stop recording, but thank you for being here
You're
today.
so welcome. Thank you for having me. I love you. I love your podcast. I love what you're doing. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. I love you. I love what you're doing. I love all the things you're bringing into the world and helping people to share their stories.
Yeah, it was meant to be that day we met on the beach. It's so funny.
It was. It was absolutely meant to be. Can't make that up.
No, you can't.